Meeting, April 3rd, 2024. The time is 4 p.m. This meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk.
City Attorney Doctor.
Here.
City Manager Burke.
Here.
Commissioner Dean. Here. Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner Reed. Here. Commissioner Shirtless.
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. Commissioners, comments, questions? Recommendation from Helena Citizens Council, Representative Lori Fitzgerald, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you. Hello, I'm Lori. I'm the current treasurer of the HCC, and I'm here to learn all about budget and the process. And we are gathering a group of volunteers from the HCC to work on, to be a budget committee and listen to all of the presentations and try to give a good report to the commission. So that's why I'm here. And at our last meeting, we had, on a different note, a really good presentation by the city attorney, chief of police, and fire chief regarding the mill levies that'll be on the ballot in June with a good question and answer, and so that we can be well informed for our districts. That's all.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Representative Fitzgerald? Okay. City manager's report.
Mayor, with your permission, I'd like to turn it over briefly to Mr. Garson to speak about the city's strategic plan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, City Manager. We just wanted to bring back before the commission today, I believe it was about a month ago, we gave a presentation at an administrative meeting, a summary document from the commission's strategic planning retreat that happened in December. A couple of commissioners had indicated they may have suggested changes to bring back to the group for consideration. We didn't set a time frame, and I haven't received anything at this point, so we just wanted to bring it back to your attention and confirm if there were still some thoughts that you guys wanted to discuss before we bring it to a full commission meeting. So the question today is just wanted to confirm that there is still a desire to maybe consider some edits or changes to that document. I see.
There's one, and it is on my list to do this week, so I'm really sorry. Mostly there were just a couple of the action ones that I think we could probably tighten up, especially heading into this budget process. So see, I can send you my edits.
No problem.
Any others? Please continue.
Mayor, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Garson. Department reports. Fiscal year 25 budget presentation. Sheila, you have the rest of the meeting.
Try to make this short, Mayor.
I didn't say it.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you. So I have a few things to go over tonight. One, I wanted to address the budget schedule for the rest of the commission meetings where the departments will be presenting their budgets to you. I'll start off with that. I'll move on to fiscal year 24 financial update through the first 6 months. I know we're a little bit behind, but we've been preoccupied with going live with our finance system. So, but it will give us kind of a snapshot of where we're at year to date with our fiscal 24 budget. And then I'll move into kind of a general government overview. And when I say general government, I mean more of the general fund and not so much the enterprise funds as we look into preparing our fiscal 25 budget. Yes, Commissioner Reed.
Can I ask a quick question on the
Please.
schedule? Looking at the schedule, I see I had in my calendar June 17th was the budget meeting, and I'm seeing June 3rd is the presentation of the preliminary budget. If amendments were going to be made, would it be at the June 3rd meeting? Ideally.
I think that ideally it would be, and then we can incorporate it into the final document. Although even at the June 17th meeting, the commission can propose to amend the budget at that meeting as well.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Thank you. So the commission meeting schedule that we've put together is most of the administrative meetings on Wednesdays, that we have pre-established meetings with the exception of May 1st. We've called a meeting in order to get all of our budget presentations in front of the commission. That particular meeting will be fire, community development, police, building and facilities. And each one of these sessions, if we can't complete all of every department's presentations, we'll just carry that over to the next meeting to make sure that we get through them all. On May 29th, we are expected to have a long meeting. That'll be a 4-hour meeting from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. We'll have a break at probably the 2-hour mark so that we can break and then come back and wrap up that particular session. June 3rd, we'll be presenting the preliminary budget, and the commission can at that point make amendments to the preliminary budget if they so desire. And then the June 17th will adopt the preliminary budget. As I mentioned earlier, is the commission can at that point make a motion to amend the budget as presented at that time as well. In July and August, we'll be bringing our city assessments. We'll be doing our calculations for city assessments, and then we'll also be bringing some information about water and wastewater rates that will go into effect likely November timeframe. And then back in September, after we've received our certified values from the Department of Revenue, we'll be bringing a final budget to the commission for adoption. And again, at that time, the commission has the option to make any amendments to the budget that they like. I've reached out to the Tourism Business Improvement District and scheduled the dates with them in order to bring their budget plans and presentations to the commission. And so they'll be looking to join us at that last administrative meeting on May 29th, and then bring a resolution of intention on June 7th, and final adoption of their work plans on June 17th. At this point, I hope this schedule works out for most people. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them at this time on the schedule. Yes, Commissioner Deep.
Thank you. I just have 2 questions. One, is it possible that we, and this might already be happening, but on maybe one of the earlier meetings or later, but maybe earlier, ensuring that we have like a list of the carryover projects. I know in previous years we've done it with each of those budgets, but I think it would be helpful to have it all in one list, maybe at the beginning, if that is a possibility. And then my other question was, I know there had been an email a few weeks ago with you and Jake about putting together the amounts that we've received in the last couple of years for grant amounts for ARPA, CARES, and state grants. As a total, and I think part of it has been we've gotten a couple questions about how it all works into the public safety mill levy, but it gives you like when someone looks at our budget, it looks like our revenues have actually been a lot higher than they really are, because so much of it was federal one-time only or state one-time grants. So I'm wondering if I know that list was getting consolidated, but maybe we can have that closer to the beginning if possible, just to provide context to the public of our revenues are limited by the state, but our revenues also look higher if you don't dig into the numbers to see where those actually came from those one-time only funds.
Yes, Commissioner Dean and Mayor Collins, that is on my task list to put together. I speak to that a little bit in this presentation as well, about the influx of all those grant funds that are now gone. It does grant money has, especially for divisions that aren't used to getting grant funds, it does overinflate your revenue, and it also overinflates your cash. So, but I will also be speaking to that in my presentation tonight about that. But yes, that is definitely on the agenda to make sure that we have that addressed, and so that people can understand our revenue streams a little bit better for their, for their information. Thanks. All right. So I'm just going to move on to our fiscal year 2024 financial update. This contains receipts and expenditures through the first 6 months of fiscal 24. So that would have been through December. Let this get up and running. First of all, I want to also thank my budget analysts, Cami McLean and Casey Ransom, who are with me tonight. They are instrumental in helping me put this information together. So I want to thank them and do a shout out to them for helping with this. Next slide. I like to start off with kind of where we started back in September. So we had, for all of our funds, we adopted $115 million in revenue and adopted appropriations of $105 million in expenditures. I will note that that does include interdepartmental transfers. So if you look at just external revenue, it comes out to about 85 or 90 million instead of the 115 with interdepartmental transfers. For the general fund, we adopted 27.4 million with appropriations of 30.2 million. That was intentional deficit spending and included primarily capital and community donations to spend down some of our cash reserves. In the special revenue funds, they adopted almost 22 million. Their appropriations were 23 million. That had primarily to do with spending an intergovernmental transfer for the Civic Center to transfer their 351,000 over to the general government capital fund for our Civic Center HVAC system. It also includes spending down of grant funds that were received in other funds such as open space, urban forestry, etc. And the enterprise funds adopted revenue of 51 million and appropriations of 38 million. So they were left with revenues over expenditures by 13 million. Their cash reserves are all earmarked for designated debt service requirements and also their capital improvement plans. Some of the amendments that we've done to date is has just been listed here. As you noted, Commissioner Dean, this includes some of the carryovers that we brought over for revenue, and it amounted to about 2.4 million that we carried over from fiscal 23 to 24 for revenue, and then 1.1 million in revenue for budget adjustments year to date. So those are adjustments to our revenue streams after we finish the carryover process, and they're handled through our budget resolution. They typically have to do with grants that we're receiving. So whenever the department heads bring a grant before the commission accepts a grant. It also allows us to increase their, not only their grant money, but also their appropriations. Or if they have at some point determined that there was some undefined debt service that they might take, that's another criteria for being able to amend revenue, but most of it is grant related that we bring for revenue streams. Looking at our citywide revenue year to date, through December, we had collected about 43.3% of what we budgeted. I'll just make a note that in our taxes, we usually receive two big distributions from the county for our taxes. We get a fairly large distribution in December, and then it's the follow-up of that comes in January, which is not represented. So I made a note that we also received about 3 million in taxes in January, which would have put us had we received that in December, would have put it as 65.7% of what we budgeted for taxes in fiscal 24. Our assessments, again, they come in the same distributions as our property tax revenue. So we get a fairly large distribution in December, but then in January, we get another big chunk. And then in May, June, we get the remaining amount of our distributions from our property taxes and assessments. So in January, we received a little over $3 million in our assessments, which puts us at 61.2% of what we budgeted for our assessment revenue. Most of the departments are pretty pleased with the performance of our investment income. Currently, right now, all of our investments are in the Montana Board of Investments STIP funds. Those are governmental funds, overnight funds. The last daily yield that I looked at was a couple of days ago. It was at 5.63%. Generally, that's due to the Treasury increasing their rates. There's no real way to truly understand what the feds are going to do with the rates over the coming year, but they have indicated that they will be dropping rates. So we may or may not see quite the investment yield that we've seen in fiscal 24, but so far in fiscal 24, we're doing pretty well. So it adds a nice addition to pay for one-time expenditures such as capital. Other financing includes healthcare contributions, not only from employees, but city contributions, our collected rents, etc. Not expected to receive the full amount that we expected for other financing, and that's primarily due in the health insurance funds. Those are just internal service funds, and I have a tendency to shoot high and then appropriate high with those. And if it comes in less, it's just a wash. It's that those are all dependent upon, how much comes into the fund and then directly how much goes out of the fund. So overestimated the health insurance fund receipts a little bit. Some of that had to do with losing some retirees off the fund, but it just fluctuates every year. Intergovernmental revenue is it's just grants from the state. It's state shared revenue. It's county and other public entity contributions. And so for the most part, I think we're pretty on track with our revenue collections for the year of what we had anticipated in our fiscal 24 budget. And just a different view of that, same information, but just a different view of that. You can see that our charges for services are doing pretty well. It includes our water and wastewater revenue, and it does represent those high consumption months from last summer. So it puts us a little bit more than the halfway mark from what we budgeted. Looking at again, citywide revenue in a different view. Is that the next slide? Did they flip? Yes. Oh, I did. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, it's just a different view. I think we're doing pretty good. Overall, I just looked at from fiscal 22 to fiscal what we're expecting through fiscal 24 is about an average of a 3.9% revenue growth from those years. And again, that includes internal transfers. Let's see, total revenue by type. There we go. So this breaks our revenue down by our governmental fund types. We have general governmental funds, we have special revenue funds, capital outlay funds, enterprise funds, and then our internal service funds. You'll note that of these, the capital outlay funds is at about 98.3% of what we budgeted. That just primarily represents the internal transfers that we're making into that fund. So some of those internal transfers can really kind of skew the information a little bit. And I try to pull it out on some of the graphs so that you can get a better view of external revenue coming into the city versus folks paying into the internal services funds like the shop fund and the health insurance fund and facilities funds. But overall, we're doing pretty good. And I think that also the enterprise funds, they're a little lower. We have some DNRC loans that we're applying for, that we're budgeted for, that we haven't drawn the full amount down. There's a solid waste intercap loan that we haven't taken yet for solid waste trucks. And then the golf intercap loan is not represented in the first 6 months of this. That was kind of wrapped up in January. So they're a little bit lower, but when you take out those expected loans, we're on track. This is just a call out of the general fund. As you know, general fund is primarily dependent upon taxes, and we also do have some charges for services. They're at 90.3% collected. That's representative of the charges that we charge external entities such as the Fort Harrison contract. We had budgeted for that. That contract is also no longer in place after the first quarter payment. So we have collected pretty much what we expected on fire service charges. It also includes swimming pool and their revenues, parks reservation revenues. And so this represents that high season from last summer. And then so to date, we've collected almost 90% of what we budgeted for charges for services. Okay. On special revenue, these funds are primarily dependent upon assessments, includes our street assessments, open space assessments, urban forestry assessments, such as that. There are some intergovernmental revenues that are mixed into these special revenue funds, such as the facilities fund. So they'll charge out other departments for their maintenance and operating rates. And so that's incorporated in these. As you can see, the biggest kind of line on the bottom there is our assessment revenue. And I noted earlier that we received over $3 million in assessment revenue in January, which would have put that up a little bit more than the halfway mark of having received assessment revenue year to date. Our enterprise funds, these are primarily dependent upon charges for service. We also have intergovernmental funds and internal service funds that are part of these enterprise funds. But it has, anywhere from water, wastewater, solid waste, but it also includes our city county building, our law and justice center, where we're collecting rents from both entities in that. So that's what this represents. Most of our charges for services are better than expected, and other financing is a little low because that has primarily to do with debt service that I noted about earlier. Any questions on revenue so far? I'm going to move on to just I know this is hard to see, but I just put it in the packet just so that you could kind of have a breakdown of some of the budget adjustments that we've done to date. That first section represents capital carryovers, and that was over $40 million of capital carryovers. And so although we don't like it to be like that, it's been a little bit exceptional because of the supply chain delays. Being able to hire consultants, being able to hire contractors in order to do work. So a lot of those capital items got carried over because of that. And I will say that although it's getting better, we still face a lot of those same issues now. And so we'll be looking, Commissioner Dean and Mayor Collins, to try to formulate what we're expecting to carry over into fiscal 25 for those capital items. The rest are just the budget adjustments that happened. That $2.5 million in water is the most recent budget adjustment we brought to the commission. It was for the water project, right? Yeah, thank you. So can you remind me what the project was, Director Leland?
Mayor, Commissioners, this is for the groundwater wells to be able to perfect our water rights that we have out there. So we are looking at drilling. We drilled 10 test wells, and then we're going to continue to put them online. So we have a third source that will be several million gallons a day.
Thank you. Director. Just an overall look at our expenditures. Total expense trend, it's really kind of up and down. And this has in part to do with capital expenditures, but it also is in part to some of those COVID funds and ARPA funds that we received in our budget amounts to distribute those out to the community. To date, we've spent about 33.2% of what our expenditures are. And I just go to the next page just to show that's by type. Most of that has to do with only expending about 14.2% of our capital outlay by the end of December. And as you know, that most of our construction season kicks up in the spring. So right now we're experiencing quite a few more capital outlays than we did for the first 6 months. And again, the debt service payments are pretty cyclical. So we made a couple of fairly large payments in January, February, and then also another large one in the 1st of April. So they'll be represented in total. And I think we're on track with our expenditures. I don't have any concerns with any of the funds with their expenditures as they relate to their appropriations. Just another view of expenditures by general government, general fund, special revenue funds, debt service funds. Again, I mentioned those debt service payments coming in late for that Geo Capital Fund and primarily related to capital and the enterprise funds. I have a few other views of expenses by type. I won't go into too much detail, but as you can see, our biggest appropriation for the general fund is the 21 million. We've spent about 10 million so far. I will say that we processed the retro pay for the police officers, which added about another 200,000. And then we'll have an extra payday in the second half of the year, which will bring us in line with what we budgeted for personnel costs in the general fund. A little bit different in the special revenue funds where most of their expenditures are related to capital. And so budgeted 14 million in capital and they've spent 2.6 so far. That's seen in the transportation services funds and also some of our other smaller funds, such as open space, civic center, things like that. The enterprise fund, again, their biggest expenditures are their capital outlay, 37 million budgeted, 4.2 million expended through the end of December. And by type, I'm just, through the first 6 months, I think we're fairly on target with where we're at, with the exception of most of those capital outlay items coming in the second half of the fiscal year. Just some things that I've observed so far this year is although I think our staffing has definitely stabilized where it was as compared to last year, we still have some areas that we find difficult to recruit, such as the account position that's been vacant for months. In public works, they have not yet secured a stormwater engineer and they have difficulty recruiting for their GIS position. In police, that always tends to be an ongoing recruitment. I know that the fire department is, I think, doing pretty well, but they're expecting a few retirements as well. So that's kind of ongoing. The good news is the support services division is stabilized along with a lot of other divisions. So that's been a real good thing for the city to be able to recruit and retain staff. Overall, our staffing is looking pretty good as compared to budget. We did settle, as I noted earlier, the police union contract, and we expended the impact of that retro pay was about 200,000, which is what we budgeted for.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
The manager, what's the duration of the contract?
I believe it was a 2-year contract, wasn't it?
It's a 3-year with an opening up.
3-year with.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Mayor, if I may, we also settled the SSD and the records contracts.
We didn't have a big retro pay for them though.
That's true.
Just observation on our expenditures. I've already talked about the capital outlay. We're still seeing, supply chain delays and issues with being able to hire qualified contractors and consultants. We already went over the appropriations that were increased through budget adjustments. And just a note for the community donations that we budgeted in $2.815 million. We've only expended about 397 through the end of December. I did issue a couple more. I issued a payment to the Friendship Center, and then also to we continue to get Tri-County Fire to submit almost monthly, but for the most part, those funds are still intact in our cash reserves, but they are reserved and restricted for the donations when they do come through.
Do we expect, or do you expect just getting those updates from the groups and funding? Do you think that they will make those expenditures before doing?
I think that a lot of them will. I know there are a few that they're still trying to define what their their true plan is. And we have secured agreements with all of the recipients of those, and they did sign those agreements and are aware of the timeline in order to get the information to us in order to distribute the funds. But the criteria was to be able to pay it down by the end of 2026. So yeah. And that's all I have for fiscal 24 financial update. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Answer questions?
Great. I'm going to move on to our general government budget overview. I think I will start off with a city manager, Burton, as soon as we get this up, to just kind of talk about what he's communicated to our department so far as we have gone through. We've just now completed our budget meetings with him, and we'll be formulating kind of a regroup with the manager on Friday to kind of see where we're at and go through a list of, wants, prioritize them, and then move forward with that. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Manager Burton.
Thank you, Director. Your commissioners will be very brief. I think we've made the commission decisions in the last 2 years, a lot of progress in their ability to recruit and retain people. And you've stabilized the health insurance and put us in a competitive posture of the county of the state of Montana. I think that has made a huge difference. We did the market-based pay plan, and we've implemented that. You've had a 5% COLA 2 years ago, a 4% COLA last year, which has also been very helpful in our ability to recruit and retain people. As part of your strategic plan, one of your main priorities is to create create the city as an employer of choice and all the factors that go into that. And I think that in many respects, we're making progress in that regard, even though you haven't adopted your final strategic plan. We're already moving because we know it's in the draft. So with that, with some increases, I think, in operating budgets, it's pretty much represented across the board as a status quo budget, maintaining the gains that we've already made with the commission's decisions on health insurance and COLAs. Trying to position this budget so that you'll have the option to continue a COLA if you so choose. And again, as Director Danielson mentioned, trying to will down those carryovers and get these projects built, understanding supply chain and contractor challenges. But I think that we're making progress in that regard as well. So you'll see those carryovers start to go down as we're able to build in contract for those capital projects.
Thank you, Manager Burton. So I just wanted to start off, as Manager Burton said, we talked about a strategy going into this budget and, making sure we understand what our resources are before we make decisions on how we can expend. And so I did just a general overview of general fund projections. This demonstrates that I'm expecting to come in about 1.5 million more than what we budgeted last year. Almost half of that is internal service charges. That includes the overhead charges that the general fund is allocating out to other departments as expenditures grow in the general fund. Those are also allocated out to the funds that utilize the resources of the commission, the city manager's office, the finance office, the attorney's office, the HR office. So that is almost half of what that, or a pretty big chunk of that, what that increase is. The rest of the increase is a proposed increase in our tax-based revenue. I think that without having our certified values come in, I typically like to forecast that initially very conservatively until I understand what the full impact of our certified values are, as well as our newly assessed properties. And I do know that we have had some annexation. So as we get that information from the Department of Revenue, that'll be representative in the final budget when we can solidify what the tax revenue is going to be. Mm-hmm.
If I might just a question / comment. I didn't see the slide go up on the screen, but going back to city manager budget priorities, it was 26.
For some reason, it's not coming up in the presentation, but I have it. So you're talking about this one, right? Yeah, sorry about that.
I had a question process-wise. So city manager budget priorities are here. I've been through this before, so I should know. But do we have an opportunity to reflect upon whether or not we want to add anything from commission budget priorities to complement this slide? Because I'm struck by one thing which I'd like to add, and I just don't know where in the process, that it would be great to have a priority that is a bit more outward facing. I think employer of choice is very inward. Capital projects are, citywide, but a focus on, customer service, interaction with the community, public engagement, things like that, that are more about our interface with the residents of Helena. And I think it's going to touch all the departments. And I would like to find a way to see how we can ensure that we are prioritizing that as well. And so whether or not we pause and reflect on commission budget priorities, if we add to the list, process-wise, I don't know where that happens.
Please.
The suggestion that I would have, Commissioner, is that after this overview and desire to have that as a priority reflected throughout the budget, we'll take direction as you have your various budget meetings. If there's a global projection, then we'll analyze that and how it might fit into the budget and report back to the commission. I don't think we have to wait until you're in the chambers to collectively make those types of requests. So we hope to be responsive throughout each and every meeting as we walk through the preliminary process. And I think that the last couple of years that's worked pretty well because the budget meetings lasted about an hour to get across the hallway. So that's the intent. And I think that it works pretty good.
Then in that case, if it's okay, I will formulate the thought I have in a more articulate manner, hopefully, and bring it to the next budget meeting and see if there's consensus to include or reflect upon that. Thank you.
I was just going to mention, Mayor, we do have on May 29th discussion of commission priorities for FY25 budget. So maybe if there are items that are not specifically in one of the previously discussed funds, that might be an appropriate place to talk about that.
Yeah, and at that point, then you'll also be able to understand the cause and effect financially throughout the budget.
Thank you. Hopefully all the slides made it, but I'm a little bit worried now, so I'm just gonna go over to the, our general cash overview and, Mayor and Commissioner Dean, this speaks to your note earlier about, how having some of those excess grant funds from the federal government, such as our CARES Act funding and our ARPA funding, I'm thinking that was about $13, $14 million that the city received. And so it's really representative in our general fund cash reserves. But as you can see, back in 2018, cash reserves were about 3 million, 3.8 in 2019. And then when we received that CARES Act funding, our cash reserves went up to a little over $8 million, climbed to 9.8 in 2021. And then we got ARPA funds and it went clear up to 12.1 million, which is very unprecedented for the city to have that much cash historically. And as we have spend that down, and not only on internal one-time expenditures, capital infrastructure costs, but also to community outreach programs and community donations. By the end of this fiscal year, I'm expecting our amount to be, which is above our reserve requirement. If you recall, our reserve requirement is to maintain a 90-day or 15% operating reserve, so that it will help us maintain continuity should something happen with our revenue streams that was unexpected. So this would be the amount above that required reserve, and it's really dwindled away from that $12 million mark. We budgeted it at about 500,000. I'm expecting it to come in about 800,000, although that can change between now and the end of the fiscal year. With an amount preliminary proposed of about $1.1 million of excess funds in fiscal 25. And so that is what I like to look at in order to propose potential expenditures on capitals, because those cash reserves are one of the only venues other than grant money for the general government to spend on capital. We do not have any other revenue streams to spend on capital for the general government funds, such as our city facilities, our police department. I know that the fire has their separate levy for some of their capitals, but the general fund also supports that as well. So I wanted to lay that out before I, also indicated what we looked at for general government capital proposals. And this is a little hard to read on there, but in your packets, we met with all the department heads and for their general capital, which would be funded from the general fund, and prioritized their projects. They have their capital project plans that they went over with you last year. Those are still intact. They continue to get updated and prioritized. And so we developed a plan for fiscal 25 for general capital purposes. This is, of course, is preliminary right now. But if you look down toward the bottom of that, parks maintenance, we're proposing about $460,000. Police at 378, and the police is pretty standard. Every single year they replace 4 vehicles out of their fleet, and so that's the lion's share of their capital every single year, is replacing 4 vehicles. Unlike some jurisdictions that allow their officers to take their vehicles home, we have a pool, and so they share those vehicles and they get used a lot, and they have to be on that 5 to 7 year life cycle in order to be circulated out and bring new vehicles in. And I have to just tell a little story about police cars. I worked for a small town in Washington State, and we were always just limited by property tax dollars, and kind of like Helena, most of their tax base was government or nonprofit. And so they had a limited, and so the police always were scrambling for, can I just have that one vehicle replacement this year? And I was there for over 5 years, and finally in the 5th year, they got one vehicle because they had, one of their cars broke down on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, transporting a passenger to another location. And so it really comes to mind that, we don't want our officers stranded with a broken down vehicle when they're transporting a person across the city. So I would say that that's just pretty standard. We need to keep up with that as part of their plan. I'll quit with that story. So we also had some pretty significant facility improvements that are represented on here. One being the Civic Center ballroom floor, looking at the tennis court on the side of the Civic Center. The Parks Director and his staff walked those facilities, and I guess it's presenting a pretty big danger for people to play tennis on those courts right now. So they've prioritized that for next year, and as well as some other facility improvements at our fire stations. And then the Public Works Industrial Facilities, while they're in the general fund, those pieces of equipment are supported by the enterprise funds. And you'll see that on the next slide, where those enterprise funds are actually paying for that equipment replacement. So although it appears as though an expense in our general capital fund, it's actually supported by the enterprise funds. And the next slide.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry, Director Dance, can I ask a quick question? Someone asked me and I didn't have an answer. Why are fire stations facilities and not fire?
Primarily because there's no funding for them. When they went out for their fire levy, they did have a fire component or a capital component within that levy. But I think the commission might remember we just spent $1.4 million or $1.3 million on a fire truck. Mm-hmm. So it also supports 6 firefighters and their operating costs that are associated with those firefighters. So they really don't have the revenue stream to support facility improvements, like other than using general government. Manager Burton.
Years ago, we put facilities under one department. But what we learned was that fire chiefs weren't very well trained to maintain buildings. And the building noise didn't get to be the top priority, so the fire stuff. So we thought to make buildings a priority and to maintain the public inspects with the section.
Thank you. And just another note about the capital. There are some other items that are in our general government capital that will be carried over. We have some projects that are for sustainability projects that the Public Works Department is managing. Those aren't represented in here because there are already appropriated funds that exist that'll carry over, similar to the Tyler Tech ERP implementation. Those are already appropriated funds. So this represents new appropriations that will be in fiscal 25 that we're proposing at this time. Again, this is draft and it could very well change. And the commission had some foresight on some priorities that they wish to see. We can certainly take those under consideration as well and come up with a final capital plan. On this next slide, this just kind of represents what what we've had for reserves and what we've spent on capital since 2018. On average, the general fund has contributed a little over $1 million for general capital, some years less, some years more. I would say that the most recent years have kind of skewed that higher because we've had those excess health reserves back in like 2019, and I even look farther back than that. It was pretty standard to only allocate about $500,000 to general capital. which really is, not a whole lot in today's dollars. $500,000 going to get you, you know, a boiler, so. It's changed, and so our contributions have to increase to keep up with our capital improvement plans. So when I met with Manager Burton, I initially proposed $1 million investment from general fund reserves for capital improvement plans. The rest of the funding can come from some reserves that we have in our general capital fund of $388,000. Part of that money comes from people paying back their loans to the city that they've taken out. Contribution from other funds. The Parks Capital Fund has a separate general capital fund, and they're paying for the balance of that tennis court improvement with that fund. And then we have a couple of items in here. It's the Beatty locomotive paint restoration and the trolley paint repair, approximately about for $30,000. And if you recall, we had a generous grant donation from a external party that gave us about $83,000. So the Parks Department is proposing to the commission to use about $30,000 of that for these two projects that fall within a historic preservation criteria. Any other questions on that, on capital right now? I did want to just kind of, every year I like to bring back the budget policies to the commission just to make sure that, you know, you're aware of them. I am proposing a couple of changes to the policies, and it's only in light and I've just highlighted them in red, is the amount that the general fund considers for contribution for internal allocation. And this kind of came about, and it might be a moot point next year, and I'll tell you about my plans with that. But internal facilities is a relatively new division within the general fund. And as they're growing and getting set up, you know, they need equipment that typically wasn't budgeted in the prior year, but they're identifying needs so that they can do their jobs efficiently. And so that brought to light that, well, I'm basing our allocations on last year's budget. These new costs really do need to be recovered. And so this line item just adds to that, to say, okay, let's take a look at any new costs that these funds didn't have in their budget last year, and let's incorporate them into the internal allocation. This year it didn't amount to much. I think it was a little bit over $20,000, but it was new money that technically gets allocated out to the enterprise funds. I have been in discussions with Director Leland and his assistants, and then have also mentioned it to Tim in the past, but I don't really have a concrete plan right now of maybe pulling those particular divisions out of the general fund and making them an internal service fund. That way it's not skewed, because it's really money coming in and money going out, and so they can probably be a little bit more efficient in the way they're operating, and I think more transparent with their funding mechanisms and their expenditures if they were separated out into an internal service fund. I was going to try to propose that for this next budget year, but I couldn't get there with our implementation of our ERP. I just didn't have time to formulate that. So that is something that we'll be looking to present to the commission for budget year 2026 if the manager agrees with the plan. Just the other change that I just wanted to clarify what we're doing with liability deductibles. So with each incident, the city has to pay for the deductible amount. And for example, if there's a wreckage of a vehicle and it's a $50,000 vehicle, the city has to pay $11,250 on that. And so how we pay back those deductible claims: if fire got in the accident, fire gets to pay back the fund. If police gets in the accident, they get to pay back the fund. And that's part of those internal service allocations. So hopefully it's an incentive for people not to get in accidents. So just two small changes to the budget policies that I wanted to bring to your attention. Our next steps in our budget is, we're completing our budget staff meetings, internal staff meetings with the city manager. I think we just wrapped that up, yesterday. He'll be meeting with the human resources director and myself and the budget analysts on Friday to look at health insurance and potential for COLAs, and then also to look at any new asks that the departments asked for this year that were set outside of the baseline budget that we have now. That way we can understand what our remaining resources are and be able to prioritize those new asks for the next budget year and bring those to the commission. So, and with that, we will begin starting our budget presentations to the commission on April 17th. And now concludes my presentation here. I'm open for questions.
It's fine. Any other comments from the commission? So is there any public comments?
I know budget just thrills everybody. It's actually my favorite time of year.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Presentation. This time, is there anyone from the public who wishes to address the commission? Madam Clerk, any online?
Mr. Mayor, I would have no public comment on.
Commissioners, any further discussion? Manager?
Yeah, I'm good to go. Thank you.
That, this meeting is adjourned.